In the quiet corridors of a once promising biotech facility, the overhead lights buzzed weakly, casting sickly pale light over sterile walls. It was here, within these walls, that the Lazarus program had begun, an ambitious genetic project aimed at defeating mortality itself. The goal was bold, seductive even, to manipulate human DNA so precisely that cells would cease to deteriorate, halting the relentless march of time. Death itself would be conquered. A team of willing volunteers, hopeful pioneers on the path to immortality, signed their lives over, stepping into a future they were assured would be magnificent. At first, it seemed like a miracle. The subjects exhibited enhanced cellular repair beyond all scientific expectations. They healed at impossible rates, bruises vanishing within seconds, deep cuts closing themselves in minutes. Those first few days felt like living in a dream. But then the dream soured. A young woman, Subject 9, had stumbled, tripping over the cold metal frame of a testing bed, and scraped her hand across a jagged piece of machinery. As expected, the wound closed before she could even feel the full sting of it. Yet, instead of leaving smooth skin, the wound became a deep, angry scar. A thick, twisted line marring her skin as if her body had simply grown over the injury, leaving its damage visible forever. Her hand looked fused, her fingers frozen in a stiff curl. Then came Subject 12, a man with a history of athletic prowess who now found himself fascinated with his own unnatural durability. He pushed it, testing his limits, enduring small pricks and cuts to marvel at his invincibility. Until the day he attempted something too extreme, a knife wound he inflicted on his own arm out of morbid curiosity. The wound healed, but left him with a grotesque mass of scar tissue, binding his arm into an unnatural, useless twist. His face paled as he realized he would carry this disfigurement forever. The scientists attempted to reverse the scarring, panicking as they observed each new wound harden, calcifying into grotesque imperfections that left each subject more visibly damaged than before. The once glimmering promise of eternal youth and beauty shattered as the participants' bodies took on the twisted forms of their accumulated injuries. Within weeks, the hallways were filled with limping figures, scarred faces, crooked limbs, bodies swollen and hardened like grotesque sculptures. Faces that once smiled with confidence were now twisted in permanent winces, forever frozen in expressions of pain and shock. Their wounds never faded, never healed entirely, each one stacked upon the last, turning them into monuments of their suffering. Patching what could be patched, the scientists reassured the subjects that solutions were forthcoming, though every attempt to reverse the scars met with failure. Instead, their bodies rejected further intervention, sprouting ridged scars over surgical incisions, fusing joints where mobility was essential. Injections meant to promote healing instead stiffened their muscles, fusing fibers into rock-like masses, turning flesh into scarred marble. The weeks passed in misery. As the once dedicated team of scientists fell apart in horror, abandoning the project one by one, the remaining subjects were left to linger, immortal but ravaged. The facility's lights flickered intermittently as power systems were neglected, casting their mutilated forms in shadows that only amplified their horror. There were corpses that could not die, wraiths without reprieve, haunting the corridors like walking nightmares. Subject 6 was found in a state of horror, his eyes open wide and staring blankly into nothingness, his face a patchwork of scars. He'd once been young, his skin smooth and glowing with life. Now, gnarled scar tissue twisted around his forehead, dragging his skin taut in places and creating monstrous crevices in others. His eyes had fused into a half-blind squint, giving him the permanent appearance of a half-closed death stare. Any glimpse of him inspired dread, his form a chilling reminder of what the pursuit of immortality had wrought. Subject 17, a former artist who had signed up in a bid to live forever in youthful vigor, suffered wounds from the most innocent of acts. Trying to touch her own face, she tore her lip and jaw, which healed into a permanent snarl. She wandered the hallways clutching her cheeks, horrified by her own reflection. She would press her fingers against the hard ridges of her scarred face as if to confirm that it was real, that her beauty had been trapped under layers of scarred flesh, buried forever. Each day became a ritual of shared suffering. Without speech, their groans and gasps of pain filled the hollow rooms. The facility's lights continued their erratic dimming, deepening the shadows that pooled in every corner, amplifying the stillness of an endless torment. There were no beds to sleep in comfortably, as bones and joints once broken and healed without precision made lying down an ordeal of agony. No one could rest, no one could escape. Finally, weeks, or perhaps months, into their interminable suffering, the survivors understood that they would endure this hideous existence for eternity. No escape, no oblivion, no end. They would remain in the abandoned corridors, scarred over and over until they became statues of the horrors inflicted on them. They would be visible testaments to the price of their ambition, hollow, staring, and immortal relics of a failed experiment. They would shuffle through the dust-covered halls, malformed limbs scraping against walls, blind and deaf to everything except the memories of their once vibrant lives. Outside, the world continued, oblivious to the prison of eternity these souls were trapped within. The facility was left untouched, deemed a failure and abandoned by all who had once thought they could outsmart death. But deep within, those who could not die continued to roam, watching, waiting, and enduring, living only to suffer forever.